I'm Mitch Silber, the Executive Director for the Community Security Initiative. Thank you all for coming to attend our high holiday briefing for security. Today, we're going to have a couple of different components to the briefing. There'll be a component talking about a recent attempted attack against a Jewish school in Memphis, Tennessee this summer. And then we will review best practices for security for the high holidays, and then go into a question and answer section. But before we begin today's program, I wanted to turn it over to Noam Gilboard, the interim CEO for the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, for some opening comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll steal the last part of Mitch's speech to say welcome to today's pre-high holiday security briefing for Greater Metro New York synagogues, schools, and JCCs. As Mitch said, my name is Noam Gilboard, and I'm proud to serve as interim CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. And today's briefing is brought to you by my colleagues from the Community Security Initiative, CSI. CSI is a joint project of UJA Federation and JCRC New York, which serves to ensure the security of the New York Jewish community and the nearly 2,000 Jewish institutions in our catchment area. This coming weekend, Jewish communities around the world will enter our high holiday period, celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Synagogues are packed with old and young alike as we come together and ask God to seal us in the book of life. Now, every Shabbat, my wife and I take our two daughters, ages 8 and 5, to synagogue. We pray, we socialize with friends, and the kids attend their own services, and then run around the building during Kiddush. And this week will be no different, except for the fact that we are keenly aware of the security measures placed around our shul for our own protection. We are fortunate to have paid and volunteer security guards stationed at the entrances to our shul. We have security procedures and panic buttons, and we know someone will have a cell phone on them to contact law enforcement if necessary. Our synagogue membership has undergone training for the case of an active shooter and to stop the bleed. This situation is not something I grew up with, but I'm grateful that these organizations exist to alert us about threats and foil them before any harm is done to our loved ones. A few months ago, we were informed that a threat was made to synagogues in our community. All the parents were instructed not to let their young children play in the main lobby. God forbid something should happen there. While nothing transpired, thank God, we were grateful for the alert, the training, and the security that was provided for all of us. I'm glad to say that the Community Security Initiative is here serving the New York Jewish community to provide many of these services and to ensure that our Jewish institutions stay safe and secure. I'm grateful to be an ex officio member of the CSI team, and I'm grateful for the work they do to ensure that all of us have a meaningful high holiday experience. Indeed, may we all be blessed this year to be sealed in the book of life. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Mitch.
Thanks so much, Noam. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what we all know is that today is September 11th. And for most of us, is a day where we all carry a heavy heart with us. Many members of the CSI team were first responders 22 years ago today. But as New Yorkers and as Americans, this will be a day that is one that we always keep in mind when we come to it on the calendar. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a moment of silence for us to commemorate the victims of September 11th here in New York, in Virginia, and in Pennsylvania. Thank you. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce two members of the greater CSI team who have recently come back from a trip to Memphis, Tennessee. As I mentioned in the opening, on July 31st this summer, there was an attempted attack on a Jewish day school in Memphis, Tennessee. At CSI, we wanted to understand what happened, what went right, what went wrong, and what could we learn from this experience to bring back here to New York to make our Jewish institutions safer because of it. So we're fortunate to send our Manhattan and Staten Island Regional Security Director, Terry Byrne, who's a retired lieutenant commander from NYPD, along with Ira Weiss, retired first grade detective from NYPD, as well as a board member from the Community Security Service, down to Memphis, where they met with not only the school director, but multiple members of the Memphis Police Department to better understand what happened this July 31st. Terry, Ira, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll try and give you some background of what we learned from our visit to Memphis. First, I'll just give you a little description of the actual property of the school and the compound that it's located on. And then a little bit about Joel, who is the subject or the perpetrator of this attack. And then we'll get into the event itself that occurred on the grounds of the school on that day. So on Monday, July 31st, we're talking about the Margolin Hebrew Academy, which is located in Memphis. It's a school that was founded in about 1976, and they currently have about 220 students in the school. School is a large campus. It's about 7 acres in size that houses a separate boys' school and a separate girls' school within that area. And the buildings are a collection of different construction. Basically, the original buildings were built in 76, but every time there was a little bit of money in the community, they added on to the original building. So many different types of buildings, types of construction material and such throughout the property. The entire property is bordered by a wrought iron fence, which is about 6 feet tall, around the entire 7-acre perimeter. The facade of the school is on a main thoroughfare. It's actually called South White Station Road. It's just a busy road that is on the frontage. And that's where pedestrian and vehicle traffic enter into the facility. Both cars and people use the same gate. So it's an electronic gate that has an electronic mechanism. You request entry through a camera and call box to the office. And if they grant access, the gate will slide to the left or right, and it will allow you access. Again, there's an in gate and there's an out gate, 2 separate gates to this facility. And there is one additional vehicular gate toward the rear near the girls' school. And that's just a single gate in and out, again, for deliveries and other things that go in the back of the facilities. There is a small synagogue on site. It's primarily used on the weekends for a small congregation. And the community does host events at the facility. So ad hoc or planned, they may host different events at this facility. That's just briefly a description of the school. Now turning to Joel, who is the subject here, or the perpetrator here in this case. Joel was a 33-year-old man, or is a 33-year-old man. He was originally from Memphis. He attended the Margolin Hebrew Jewish Academy, and he graduated in 2009 from the school. However, after his graduation, he really didn't have much to do with the Jewish community there. He kind of fell off the map. And we know that he had been offered a scholarship to a yeshiva in Israel to study for 1 year. And we have also heard from staff members that they believe he may have attended Yeshiva University in New York after graduating from high school. And that's why he hadn't been involved in anything in the Memphis Jewish community for a while. The historical context to Joel and his life in Memphis is that while he was in school, there was an incident in his childhood when he was 13 years old, and his father was shot and killed by Memphis police in Memphis. And what that meant was his father had reportedly been diagnosed as a bipolar individual. He was a physician, but apparently there was some issues, whether it was with his not taking medication or whatever, but there was police called to his home because Joel's father was carrying a firearm and firing the firearm. And when confronted by police, who ordered him to put the weapon down numerous times, he refused their orders, and it ended up in police shooting and killing his father in his presence. So when Joel was 13 years old, this occurred, and the degree of impact that that had on him and his future life is something that is being discussed now, but that's something that potentially had influence on him. So that's background. And now we go to the actual event. Now, nobody in the community had heard from Joel in a very long time, meaning years. And then shortly before this incident, Joel began to post a few things on social media. Nothing extreme, nothing in any way that cried out that there was a danger of sorts, more emotional or reconnecting with the community. He had a few posts about the school. Again, nothing threatening, but it was strange in retrospect when we spoke to people at the school. They said it was strange because they hadn't seen anything from this person in so many years. And then all of a sudden he started posting and referencing the school. He also had some emotional posts about visiting his father's grave and having a conversation with God or screaming out to God at the gravesite, which he posted these things. So what we determined is it was a very emotional point of time for Joel during this time or leading up to the actual event. Then we go to the day of the event. On Monday, July 31st, at about 12:14, right about noontime, Joel, who's driving a rented vehicle, okay, he's in a maroon Ram pickup truck that had California plates, drives to the school. And at the time, the school was having repairs done to its roof. There had been a storm, part of the roof was damaged, and there was a construction crew working on the building. And the exit gate from the facility, again, as I mentioned before, there was an entry and an exit gate. The exit gate was in the open position for two reasons. One is during the storm, there was a short fuse which burnt out the motor for the gate, which didn't allow it to be closed. But at the same time, the construction vehicles were going in and out on a regular basis, so they didn't determine it necessarily to be something that needed to be immediately addressed because the flow of traffic back and forth all day was very busy. So Joel drives in through the out gate and he pulls up, and Terry, I believe you have the map there of the front of the building and where these incidents, as I'm going to describe them, where he was and how these things. So he comes in through the exit gate. He drives along the perimeter of the parking lot, and he stops at curbside right by the front door of the facility. Now, the front exterior doors to this facility are double doors. These double doors are not locked ever, at no time whatsoever. When you open these doors, you're in a vestibule. And in that vestibule, that's the place for deliveries to leave the packages or food or whatever it is. So they do not lock that exterior door. The door was replaced with a grant, but that exterior door is not locked. And we'll describe later that there is, however, 2 additional security doors beyond those. So it isn't that they eliminated the man trap, they just added an additional set of doors when you enter the building. So Joel, again, stops curbside, gets out of his vehicle, again, not parking in a parking spot, parking right up front, goes into the building, and he is now looking to gain entry. He bangs on the second set of doors. He's already in the vestibule. He bangs on the second set of doors, trying to get someone to come to open the doors for him. Now, today was not a school day, meaning July 31st was not a school day. There were only 3 staff members in the school on that day, and they were not seated very close to the door. So it takes time for them to get up from where they're sitting in the building, walk to the door, and then have a conversation with whoever's there to determine why they're looking to access the facility. Joel, at that point, became impatient because he had waited probably a matter of seconds. I guess seconds seemed longer when you want to get in. And after nobody responded to his banging, he then turned around, walked out of the front 2 doors, and is now back in the front parking lot. Those staff members still didn't get to the door, and he hears noises from the side of the building where the construction workers are working. And he walks around the side of the building, and on his way is checking some other doors to see if they are open so he can gain access into the building. When none of those doors are open, he continues around the side of the building. at which point he confronts some of the construction workers who are doing the repairs to the building. And he has an exchange with them asking basically who's here and who are you working for. And they basically said, we're working for the administration, doing a repair. He didn't like the response. And Joel takes out a firearm and fires 2 shots in the direction of the construction worker. Now, again, I say in the direction of the construction worker, he was relatively close to the construction worker. And it was unsure whether he was retreating and firing in the direction to scare someone or whether he was actually trying to hit the person in front of him. But either way, he fired a gun in the direction of this individual, at which time the construction worker turns around and runs away. And Joel turns around and heads back to his vehicle parked right in front of the building. Joel then, as he's getting to his vehicle, fires 1 round from his firearm into the concrete or the asphalt pavement right by his vehicle. And then he gets into his car and he starts driving toward the exit gate. Again, not going around the perimeter this time, but driving over all the obstacles on the way to the gate, meaning those parking bollards or the grass, curbs that are there. Again, I'm sure he was in a rush to get out of there, so he was looking for the straightest point to get out. And he fired 1 more time before exiting into the air and leaves the premises. Now, looking back at this, we look at several things. That is basically the whole series of events that occurred on property. When we look back at it, we look at the fact that when he walked into that first vestibule and banged on the doors to get access, there were security cameras. And basically, the staff saw him on security cameras. One staff member thought that he looked like one of the parents of a current student there, but they weren't sure. Another one had said they didn't know who he was, but the way the community was, it's a very, very small community there. Most of them know each other or reference knowing people within the community. And that if they would have gotten to the door, odds are they would have let him in. And what does that mean? It means there's a synagogue on premise that some community members use sometimes, that it's a regular practice for alumni to come back there to visit the school, that they would not have felt a threat to let him in. But at the same time, when they forensically went back and looked at the videotapes, when he was banging on that door, he already had the gun in his hand. The people could not see the gun in his hand because the video of that area was limited and they weren't able to see him holding the gun. So that would have been a tragedy if they would have just had a conversation and he would have said some familiar names and they would have opened the door. It could have ended up very differently in that situation. Again, when he's looking for other doors in the place to get into, again, very important that he was not able to find another access point into the location. And then the interaction with law enforcement, which is important to point out. So when he bangs on these doors, he has not yet fired any shots. We don't know that he's a threat until he walks to the side of the building and he fires 2 rounds. When that happens, the administrators who are sitting in the office, one of them hears these shots and recognizes them as gunshots or believes that they're gunshots. She is currently on the phone with a colleague and says, I have to go. I believe that I heard shots. Okay. The colleague who's on the phone, not present at the school, says, you go take care of whatever you have to. I'll call 911. And she proceeds to go into the building where the other 2 staff members are. And she tells them, lock yourself in an office and don't come out till I tell you. I have to find out what's going on. Again, at this point, I would point out it is very important for you to call 911, especially if you're the one present at the facility and you're the eyewitness or ear witness that can provide the most accurate information to law enforcement, and that should be your first call and not rely on someone else or someone who's not at the location and doesn't have the specific information to relate to police, you should do that yourself. At which time the administrator went out of the building, did not initiate a lockdown, did not hit the panic alarm, did not personally call the police, left the facility to make sure everyone outside was okay, which is commendable, and that's a bit of a cool head. But at the same time, no knowledge to whether the area was secure, if he was the only shooter, if anybody outside was injured, or any other situation. They tried to convince the contractors to come inside and stay in the building till law enforcement arrived and rendered the location safe. They preferred to stay outside, and she went back into the building. Again, there are protocols and procedures to determine if you lock down, when you stay in lockdown, how you should end a lockdown when you make sure that the location is secure. The police did respond. Again, initially the call came over to police as man with a gun. And I don't know if people here are familiar with Memphis. Gun licenses are very easy to get, and calls for a man with a gun are very, very common. It's a very different prioritization in the police system between man with a gun and active shooter at a school. That information did not flow as accurately as it should have, but the police did respond. They ended up locking down all the schools in Memphis, not just this school, and not just Jewish facilities, all the facilities in Memphis. And then staff there notified their representative from SCN that there had been an incident, so they could also notify the Jewish network that there was an incident at a school, so they would get that secondary notification of locking it down, because we want to make sure that word is spread out to everybody. The police were in contact with SCN and the school to get access to photographs of the individual, to get access to a description of the vehicle and the license plate, and that information facilitated the police making a very quick stop of the individual. They located his vehicle using license plate reading technology. They were able to locate the vehicle. Police followed the vehicle. Ultimately, Joel pulled over and exited the car with gun in hand, moving toward officers, and was shot by police. At the end of that incident, Joel was taken for emergency treatment. He will survive, and he's been charged with multiple charges: attempted second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, possession of a firearm in the commission or attempt to commit a felony, carrying a weapon on school property, and assault against the first responder. All that is, thank God, occurred without any innocents getting hurt. Law enforcement was very, very grateful to the school for its cooperation. Just as now informational, the school did get grants in 2023 and replaced all the exterior doors. So the doors were security doors, and that was essential. The doors use electronic key cards to access the facility. The school also got a grant in 2020 for cameras, and they have an extensive camera array around the whole perimeter and buildings of the school, which was really useful for the police in this instance. Again, because school was not in session and there were no students on premise, there is no armed security. But during the school year, whenever students are present at the facility, there is armed security at the school. The windows, I'm trying to preempt some of the questions people might have. The windows were not laminated or protected. The whole frontage of the building is glass. However, it was cost prohibitive, so they hadn't been able to do that. They do have policies and procedures for active shooter, and they practice that twice a year at minimum, sometimes more beyond that during the school year. And they, like I said, they got the grants. They do have a community WhatsApp group, so they share information in real time between all the Jewish institutions in Memphis. So they use that on that day to be able to keep people informed. And post the event, they were able to host a town hall meeting and send out mailings to the community to keep them informed, to reassure them that they're doing everything they can and in cooperation with police to make sure that opening of school this year will be safe for everybody, and that they should, be concerned, but know that it's being handled. Generally, that's the information. I'm sure we're going to have some questions at the end. Terry, if you wanted to add anything, please do. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, I'll just point out, it bears repeating when it comes to calling 911. You know, when we do the active threat training, one of the things we tell people is to call 911 as soon as it's safe to do so. That means that if you feel like you're in a safe place, that you call 911, and there shouldn't be any protocols in place that interfere with that. Number one is, if you want to call us, we appreciate you calling us in the wake of some kind of incident, whether it's, you know, somebody defaced the door of the synagogue or something else that happened, Zoom bomb. But it's more important that you call 911 first. We can help you later with your communications with the police and all of that. But in an emergency situation, that first call really needs to be 911. And there should be no escalation. There are institutions I've dealt with where they had an internal protocol wherein you have to sort of escalate through your chain of command before 911 gets called. That should never be the case, and everybody should be empowered to call 911. To me, the more calls that the dispatcher gets from a location is they're very quickly going to escalate that call based on the number of calls and the information they're having. So call 911 when it's safe to do so. And if you have things like panic buttons or lockdown systems, those things should be tested regularly. And if you feel that's an emergency, that's what that equipment is for. It's not there to look good or sound good on a report. It's there for you to use. Just make sure that you test it once in a while to make sure it's operating. But that's going to get you a much quicker response. You don't even have to engage with an operator on the phone, because that's going to, once that alarm is hit, they're sending the police right away. And we'll save the rest of the questions for later. If you have any, we'll be glad to answer them at the end.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Terry. Really appreciate you going down there. CSI will continue to send teams when there's an incident that threatens Jewish security, whether it's nationally or internationally, so we can find out what happened and bring those insights back to help you all keep your institution secure. Seth, were there any questions that came up that you had seen?
There are. Would you like to go over them now?
Sure. Let's, before we move on to the next segment, I think it's worthwhile handling the questions here.
So first question, was the exit gate to the parking lot left open all day as a policy?
No. Go ahead, Ira.
So generally, no. The policy is the gates are closed on a regular basis. There had been a storm the night before, and actually the fuse blew, and they were unable to close the gate. At the same time, due to the fact that there was ongoing construction at the location during the day, they determined that they would let it remain open to facilitate the trucks coming and going. Again, who had foresight of something like this happening, but they assumed we'll get it fixed after so that it's easier for the construction workers during the day.
Okay, great. Next question. When you stated you should call 911 yourself, the question is, should every synagogue have a preparedness plan with information like that? How should the plan be constructed, and what are the essential parts of it?
So that's a great question. And as much as cameras and doors and everything else are great technology and help security, you don't know what to do with them, it creates problems. So every synagogue should have a plan. They should practice that plan, because the first time you institute the plan should not be during an emergency. It should be something that you know and your congregation knows. So yes, you should call 911. There was miscommunication, and I'm sure you've heard of the game broken telephone. If I have a piece of information and give it to someone who's giving it to someone who gives it to someone, it doesn't always end up the same as what you intended at the beginning. And if I'm a witness to a crime and I can describe the perpetrator and what he's wearing and what he looks like, and there may be follow-on questions from the 911 operator, or there may be a callback from police for more information, they should be getting the person who is there. Now, if I'm standing directly next to someone and we both witness the same thing and he's calling and I'm right there, then no, not both of you necessarily have to call. But more than certain, if you're not even at the location, not the best practice, but you want to have the most accurate, the most timely flow of information there is, and that's to law enforcement, because they will be the first through the door, and you want to be able to give them as much information as possible.
And one of the things we learned in this case was that there was some miscommunication, and clearly the police dispatcher was not made fully aware of how serious this was and never put out a job that there were shots fired. There was apparently a call in queue about a man with a gun on the premises, and that should have still escalated it because it was a school, but it never went out as a shots fired. Plus, the season probably worked against them as well because school was not in session. So it kind of downgraded the initial reaction to this.
Yeah, again, Terry, just to add to that, I actually got the language from the job, and the actual language of 911 was, there is a male white wearing a green shirt on property armed with a gun. Now, that is not an active shooter. And in a city like Memphis, where crime, I believe in 2021, it was the most dangerous city in America. I think now they're number 4 or 3.
Great.
A call of a man with a gun is not rare at all. The police are understaffed, responding to jobs all day. And you want to give accurate information so you get the correct response. So due to this, that some guy had a gun on property is not the same as there's a man shooting at people on property, which would have gotten an entirely different response and quicker response.
Okay, so next question. Did the police ever discover what the intent of the perpetrator was? Had he been granted entry?
The perpetrator was going through some emotional distress. And essentially, it is an ongoing investigation. It's still under investigation. He's been indicted on some charges. From what we understand, was not directly targeted against the institution. The person was Jewish, was a former student of the school, but he was going through an emotionally difficult time, and he was seeking out something at the school that, correctly or incorrectly, that he chose to go there.
So next question. Did the CCTV system include license plate readers, or did the staff record the license plate?
That's a great question too, Seth. Correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but I don't believe that the school had LPRs, but they had great cameras. And initially, and I'll tell you how good their LPR system was. Initially, all they had was a description of that it was a pickup, and they had the color, and they had a very partial plate, only a couple of digits. But the LPR system did its job. As soon as they very quickly.
Excuse me, Terry, it's the Memphis Police Department's LPR system.
Right. So the school quickly supplied video to the police through our partners at SCN and got those numbers put into the LPR system right away. And then even with that limited information, the LPR was able to identify the vehicle traveling north away from the school and then start to track it down.
We have the local number of the precinct. Is it okay to call that number or just call 911 first?
No, I'm going to tell you, call 911. It has been our experience here at CSI that, the community affairs officers are there to help you, but not in emergency situations. That's not their job. Their job is community affairs. If something scares you, if you feel the need to call the police, if it's a crime that occurred or a crime in progress, you want to call 911 for 2 reasons. You want to get that more immediate response, and it also memorializes your call for service. If there's something going on that it doesn't get picked up right away, or there's some miscommunication and another call comes in, they're going to see that there's a second call coming from that location. There's a third call from that location. That's why I stressed before, if it's any type of emergency or crime, call 911. You can save those other calls for later when things have started to calm down.
Yeah, and 911 will designate the closest resource to you to get it to you, not necessarily the precinct. So 911 has the ability to reach out to all units and dispatch citywide if need be to find units, even if they're not from that precinct, if they happen to be in the area.
It's not bad to have that information from someone in the precinct or department on your mobile phone. But again, that's a secondary or tertiary option. 911 is your first option if it's an emergency.
Okay, this is a related question. Should there be a script posted for the 911 caller to make it easier to remember what to say?
There are scripts for how to give an accurate description of a subject, or how to give an accurate description of a vehicle, and it could have like an image of a person. It'll tell you, what kind of hair did he have, what kind of complexion, but in general, every case is going to be different. The operators that you interact with at 911 are trained to ask those questions, or kind of walk you through that process in a sense. So it's going to be hard to stick to a script when something's in progress. You might be a little bit adrenaline flowing and frazzled, but you could study up that script beforehand so that you can give an accurate description.
The one thing to keep in mind is if you're going to remember anything about when you call 911, give your location first. If you get disconnected or you're interrupted for some reason, you want to get your location out first, because if there's any kind of stress in your voice and you get at least your location out, they're going to start sending the troops right away.
How do you maintain a gate system with an active parking lot? Does not seem like an option for a facility that has a nursery school and a religious school with many drop-offs and pickups.
It's very difficult. And even in the best case scenario, in the situation they had, the gates slide open, they remain open for 30 seconds to a minute. Piggybacking becomes a problem. Pedestrians coming in through the vehicular gates becomes a problem. But again, is it better than not having a gate? Absolutely. The idea would be to go forward toward the entryway with people who can screen cars before they even get to the gate, so you know who's coming through or who's trying to walk through. Again, there's no perfect solution. There are technological solutions where there are bollards that allow one vehicle in at a time and one gate doesn't open till the other one. But that's what you see at military installations and government buildings. It's really expensive. So again, we go with what we have and what's reasonable, and we try and make the best of the situation we're in. And a lot of that is engaging with the vehicles, seeing what's coming in, and determining if there's an outright threat coming toward you.
Thanks again, Terry, Ira. If there are further questions that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out to your regional security director. We can get the answers for you if you have those particular questions. But, really two take-home messages here. Number one, grants matter. Grants got this institution hardened doors. Grants got this institution a very impressive camera system that provided the necessary information that led to the arrest. And number two is access control. Access control kept those doors shut, the internal doors, and kept the staff members who were inside the institution safe. Time and time again, we've seen, whether it's Halle, Germany, Tree of Life, Texas, whether you control access to your building can make all the difference between life and death. So something to keep in mind. With that, we're going to turn to the second part of our presentation today, and that's going to be about security procedures for the high holidays. So some practical steps that you can do as we move into the high holidays on Friday. Leading our presentation for this will be Liron Felibi, our Regional Security Director for Long Island, a retired member of the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic security agency, and also formerly of El Al, Israel's airline responsible for security in Eastern Europe. So with that, Liron, I'm going to turn it over to you for high holiday security procedures and best practices.
Thank you, Mitch. So in this, first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today. As Mitch said, in the second part of the show, we're going to discuss the major blocks of how to prepare for the high holiday, how do we prepare, and what kind of measures we can apply in our facilities. As Seth mentioned before, you can ask questions at the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, we will review them and answer as much as we can. So the major parts that we're going to talk about, and we're going to take it one point at a time, and then every segment we're going to elaborate a little bit about it. The first thing is contact information for local police, precinct, or department. And I want to emphasize this is not in case of emergency, okay? This is something we do as preparation. As Mitch said before, and Terry, in case of emergency, you call 911. This is as part of your preparation for the high holiday. And what do you give the local precinct? First, give them the schedule. the elaborate schedule of all the services and numbers. How many people are you expecting? You can also tell them how many people were last year. If you have an outdoor service, of course, mention that. It's very important. If you have keys, access point, access control, codes that you can give them in advance, it's better that the local police will have access to your building, to your facility, layouts. The best thing is to invite them for a meeting, right? Invite them for a cup of coffee before the high holidays. Make sure they know the building. Make sure they have access to the building. If you see police present before the high holidays, during the high holidays, approach them. Once again, I think it's in the spirit of the high holidays, also whatever you can offer. Use of restrooms, coffee, some refreshments, it's always for the better. So to create that contact, that connection, that personal connection is very important. The next thing I want to talk about is screening procedures. So the screening procedures, it's better be done by someone who knows the people that comes to the facility. And if it's a security personnel that really works there for the past year and know the community, or volunteers, people from the community, from your facility that will step up for this high holiday, will stand at the door and will look at the people that come inside. If you don't have those people, and if you are using any kind of a system that you sell tickets before the high holidays, then those people that check the tickets line, check the people that come in, should also take a look at the people that come inside to the facility. And not only, when they sit, sometimes I saw in facilities, they sit in front of a laptop on a table or with list, and they don't really look at the person that they're handing the ticket or checking his name. So that screening process, when somebody's standing at the door and screening and look at the people that are coming in, is very important. It's I think the second barrier that we have, except of a good door and a security personnel, we will talk about it later on. It's also important that those people will be recognizable, all right? Give them some kind of an outfit that will distinguish them, or some kind of a sign, or I don't want to say use the word uniform, that will distinguish their role as a screener. It's also created the term. We'll talk later on about the importance of communication between all those parts, the screeners, the security personnel, and what exactly other roles they have. I just want to mention, if you do have screeners, if you have volunteers, there's a great training called Power of Hello that we can offer as well, that give more tools to those people on how to screen people, how to approach people, and how to detect suspicious behavior. I want to show you this slide. So what is suspicious behavior? The best definition of that is anything out of the norm, out of the routine. You have to know your facility. You have to know your surrounding. You have to know what is next to you, next to your location. And then you can recognize anything that is out of the ordinary. People, and we're talking about people, okay? When we're talking about suspicious behavior, in the end of the day, it's a person that is doing something out of the normal. And it can be in many aspects. He can look dressed that is out of the normal. And we are not talking about about a coat in the summer. I think we passed those days long ago. We are talking about, Jewish maybe a signature. You know your community, you know how people dress around you. And you have to learn to recognize things that out of the regular. Like we saw in the Memphis example, guy tried to attempt to use other doors to go into the facility. So if I see somebody who's not sure, you see that is not familiar with his surrounding and is walking around purposely. That is a red flag. Of course, taking photos, asking questions, showing interest in the security procedures, or maybe in the schedule, but not like, hey, when is the next spray? So this is something that should jump. Abandoning objects or anything that is when we look for suspicious behavior, we also should be aware of someone that maybe is testing our security procedure, our security personnel. You can do it by maybe once take a picture or put in something and see if they are good enough to identify. What to do in case of suspicious behavior? If you do encounter with a suspicious person and he's outside of your facility, if you have a security personnel, the first thing is that those people will approach it. The most important is to create some kind of a safety and a distance between you and this person and make sure he cannot come into the facility. So if you have people in the lobby, get them inside, close the door, and then approach this person. It depends on what you see suspicious. If it's suspicious enough that you feel in your gut that no, you cannot handle it yourself, then you close the door, stay inside the building, and call the police. I don't expect you, nobody expects you to go risk yourself. There's a balance between going to approach a suspicious person, but also keeping yourself safe enough and not endanger yourself or your community. And as we said before, if you're behind closed door and you lock the door and it's a good door, then you're safe enough. You're buying time, you can call 911 and have the police come. And once again, without endangering yourself or any other people, if you can take a picture of that person, and so we can have some kind of a record so we can distribute it to other people, other facilities, and even give it to the police, it's better, okay? You have to plan those kind of things. You have to talk about it among yourself, the volunteers and the security personnel. Okay, this was about detecting suspicious behavior. Let's talk about swatting a little bit. Recently, we are seeing nationwide, throughout all the country, we see many attempts and many cases when Jewish facilities are being swatted. What is swatting? Swatting is actually a terminology that is taken from the word SWAT, special weapons and tactics. And what is happening is that people are calling the 911, often 911, or directly to a local precinct, and actually reporting of active shooter incident in a Jewish facility. That will create law enforcement heavy response. They will, if you know of an active shooter, they will send the SWAT. And that's why they call it swatting. So, of course, the purpose of those attempts are to disturb us, to ruin our day, disturb our Jewish life and the high holidays routine. And we can see it's happening in a growing and increased numbers recently. What to do? First of all, I think that, like we said before, the preliminary communication with law enforcement before the high holiday, tomorrow, today, before Friday, before Rosh Hashanah, have to reach out to the police, tell them what's going on, and have the number of the precinct commander. This is where you got it. Maybe 911 will call you ahead of time before you see the SWAT, okay, coming into your door. Remember, the call doesn't come to you, so you can sit around and then you see police car coming at your building. You have to talk about it with your security personnel, with your volunteer personnel, and guide them and tell them, listen, it's a possibility, it's going to happen. We are sitting here and pray, and out of the blue, we have SWAT cars on our doors. What we should do, how we should remain calm, how we should approach the police. It's all about remaining calm. And when you hear those sirens, you will hear them from afar. Get prepared, get a message to the inside. One person should get to the inside. So everybody should know that that kind of a scenario should happen, okay? And law enforcement will react. They cannot take a chance. From our experience, they react. If you will have a chance that somebody will call you ahead of time to make sure, it's not the likely scenario. The likely scenario that they will respond in full measures and arrive to your facility. Okay, so remain calm, be prepared for that scenario, communicate inside and outside to the police when they're coming. Okay, so we talked about swatting attack, and I want to, before we go to anonymous calls and bomb threats, I want to leave that for the end, because I want to see that we have enough time to talk about security personnel and physical security measures. So regarding security personnel, our recommendation is that the better solution is to employ active law enforcement. We can see it in New York City. In some places, it's not allowed by the law enforcement regulation. If you cannot employ an active law enforcement agent, then a retired cop is the second priority. But also armed guard, unarmed guard, anything is better than don't have security at all. Okay, when you hire security, some facilities only hire them for the high holidays because they understand that the threat level is a little bit higher. Make sure they know your facility. Okay, they will stand at the door, they will stand outside, but they have to know the layout of the facility. They have to know the schedule. As much as you can, tell them about the community. And if you have picture of what happened last year, this is the time to show them. You have to have that talk with them. You have to give them the terminology that you are using in your daily life. The room that you call a social hall they can understand it somewhere else. So those internally signs, internal language that you use in your facility, they have to be aware of that. They have to know the place, they have to know the layout, and you have to talk to them about some expectations. What are you expecting them to do? Where do you expect them to stand? And how do you expect them to get dressed? We call it in a more professional way, post orders, which will describe to them exactly what is their position and role in case of routine and also in case of emergency, what you want them to do. Some point of advice, it's very recommended to create layers of security. If you have a security personnel and security volunteer, it's advised to put the security personnel outside of the facility, create a perimeter ring outside of the facility, and the volunteers at the door. If you don't have them, then of course the door is the bottleneck when you do the screening. But if you can create those layers of security, those circles above your facility, try to do that. It means be active. Not only stand at the door, do those rounds around the facility, look left and right, and if you're in the middle of the city, then it's even a block away. So you can be visible, create deterrent, and maybe see the suspicious guy that is either preparing for the attack before he comes to your facility. So when we are active, when we're creating those layers of security, we have more chances to succeed and to prevent an attack on the facility. Let's talk a little bit about physical security measures that we can apply during the high holidays. So the first thing is make sure that everything you have works. And the door is working properly, the lock is working properly. We talked about alarm, you just asked question about CCTV. Make sure that all what you have is in order and it's working. Panic button. You can try those things. You can make a test and try it if it's worked. If some of you have apps like the Rave app, and make sure that it's working. You can order and ask for a test to make sure that it's working. Use anything that you can from the community to enhance your security of the facility. I saw facility that ask for members of the community to park their car in a certain place. So the parking lot now is blocked and you have like a barrier. Nobody can run into your building or into your front. So use anything that you can to make sure that the facility is safe. I also would advise you to do a little bit of I know it's not Pesach, but a little bit of pre-cleaning. Make sure there's no garbage cans, if you have those donation of clothing, make sure it's empty. Anything, gardening, anything that can be clean and can be empty, and so think the suspicious object will be visible, this is the time of the year to do that. Pesach is the second time. Let's talk a little bit about emergency plan. So first of all, the most important thing in emergency plan is shelter in place area. You have to have a shelter in place area. And remember, we're talking about big numbers now. So your small room that you used to use as a shelter in place area has to be changed. Now you have to make sure you have room that is big enough to hold all those people that will come, because they're coming only in the high holidays. So make sure you designate a shelter, make sure it can be locked, that you have curtains on the window that can be shut down. If there's windows on the doors, those light slides, make sure you can cover them. If you can place a landline there, fire extinguisher, another lock on the door, and I'm talking about Home Depot solution, okay? Sometimes it's only about something temporary that you put on the door. Don't mix it with fire codes, okay? Everything we do has to be approved by a fire code. Make sure that all your evacuation routes are empty and clear. Sometimes people using hallways or exit door as a storage room. This is the time to make sure those things are clear and all of your evacuation doors are properly working and can be easily accessed and easily used. Let's talk about a little bit emergency communications. And I think it was all mentioned during the Memphis presentation. The first question, who's called 911? The answer is everybody. Terry said it very clearly. Everyone is empowered to call 911. You don't have a chain of command in this case. And I don't care that 20 people will call 911. If you have a landline, make sure people know how to use it. Sometimes landline has to push a different button to get an external line, like 0, 9, or whatever. So make sure people know how to access this landline. And as Terry said, when you call to 911, first you give your location, communication number. You stay on the line. You don't call them and then hang up, okay? And you make sure they understand, hey, we are at synagogue, this and this location, we are being shot at. Somebody is inside the building with a gun shooting. You have to stress the scenario and what's going on, and that this is an emergency. So everybody can call, put the location first. Now, when we talk about plan and emergency communication, okay, we call 911, but who is actually telling the members of the community that we have an emergency? Who is activating the emergency plan? And how does he do it? Is he using radio? Is he using the PA system? And what should he say? I personally believe that there's no need to use codes. I saw some facilities using colors. We have red situation, and that means it's an attack. From my perspective, and everybody can join and say what they're saying, keep it simple. Say what it is. Emergency, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Very simple. I don't believe that in a case of emergency, somebody will start remember what is red, what is blue, and what is yellow. So talk about it among yourself with the security personnel, with the volunteer, have a meeting, do this kind of a briefing. Okay, this is how we can tell the congregants in case of emergency. You can use the radio, you can use the PA, and show them how to use it. Make a drill. I don't know if you call it a drill. Make a test. See those things are working and try. Have the security personnel, have the volunteer use it before Friday, before the high holiday. As I said, keep it simple. Security volunteers. This is the end of the last segment that I want to talk about. So I cannot stress enough the importance of that roles of volunteers, ushers, people that know the community and stepping up and in this time of high holidays. I even saw a facility that in order to recognize them, they gave them green yarmulkes. And now they are the green yarmulkes. and they are, they have a briefing before that, a training before that, some light food, and to recognize their effort. Their main tasks are first the screening of the personnel, detecting suspicious people, because they know the community, they know who should come in. So they have to detect the suspicious people that comes into the facility, or even take a look a little bit outside and try to locate them when they come. If you have a line of people, look at the line of people. So screening of the people, locating suspicious people, and then locating suspicious objects. When they walk around, they know that those people supposed to know the facility better than all of us. Those are the people that come every Friday, and they know who's coming there. So they have to know the facility, look for anything irregular, any suspicious object. And their last task is they are the crowd control. In case of emergency, they should guide the congregants what to do. Most of the people, or let's say some of the people, come to the synagogue only in high holidays. They are not aware of the emergency plan. And we cannot brief 200, 800 people in an emergency plan. Okay, the rabbi can say in the beginning of the pray, where are the emergency exits are located. But we can brief 10, 12 people, and they will control the crowd. And they will tell people what to do in case of emergency. They will tell them either to lock down where is the shelter-in-place areas, or how to evacuate the building in case of a needed evacuation, and where do they go? Where is the meeting point? And how do we get there? They will lead the people. They will direct them and lead them to those meeting points. That's it. I will end in that because I don't want to take too much of the time.
Let's try and take maybe 3 questions, Seth, and then I want to be mindful of people's time. Then we'll wrap up with Andrea.
What if a stranger asks to use your bathroom on the high holidays?
It depends. If you are in Williamsburg and this guy is you understand, he's a religious Jew that walks between a synagogue and there are 10 synagogues on the block, it's something else. You have to communicate with that person, and if the communication, this conversation should happen outside of your facility. Okay, Colleyville, Texas, the guy just wanted to use the bathroom and we had a hostage situation. So this conversation has to happen outside of the facility, and then you have to make the decision. Don't let anybody that you don't know to the building. Make sure you know if there's a restroom in the Dunkin' Donuts across the street, you can refer them to that. So you have to know your surrounding, right? And send them to somewhere else.
Yeah, and just to put an exclamation point on it, we don't want to criticize what happened in Colleyville a year and a half ago, but to Liron's point, have the discussion with the person outside. It's a subjective decision. Use your sense, use your judgment, and if you're in doubt, it's not your responsibility to be the bathroom. Your responsibility is for your congregants who are inside your synagogue, or your students inside your school, or your membership who's inside the JCC. Think about their safety first. So that would be the advice on that.
So this is about how the security officers should dress. Should they be in a suit? Should they be in plain clothes, not to be detected as a security officer? And then the second part of the question, how do they identify themselves to the on-duty police when they respond or have to respond to the facility? So we can take the first part first, whoever wants to jump on that, as far as how they should dress.
Well, I think we're talking about, visible and invisible. If you've got the luxury of having multiple security guards, the ability to have a few people out front who are visible in a security role, they can serve as a visible deterrent, so that someone who's doing reconnaissance on your location might consider going elsewhere because they're concerned they'll be confronted with security. If you have additional people, you could have another person inside, to Liron's point about layered security, who's not quite as obvious. And that person might be the fallback in case they're able to breach the door and they're inside your location, that person, is not obvious to a potential hostile actor. So that would be the guidance. And so it's dependent on the number of security personnel you have at your institution. If you don't have many, outside deterrent is the guidance first.
And the next part of that, same related question is, how do they identify themselves to on-duty police if police have to respond during their services? So I could start with that, and anybody else who I spotlighted from the team can jump in as well. But I think there's a couple of things you need to do. One is, when you talk about planning, it's very important that you speak to your local precinct and you let the officers know there and the commanding officer know that you are bringing in either armed or unarmed security. It'd be great if they can come prior, if they can meet these individuals prior. I can tell you what happens at my synagogue. Typically, we won't know exactly who the officers are because we up security and expand it on that day for the high holy days. When the officers respond, which they do from the precinct, we make sure that they're introduced. They know who each other are. They know who's armed and who is not armed. And in addition to that, just on a separate note, knowing the facility, we make sure that the officers that come that are on duty, we walk them through. We want to let them know where services are being held and have a general knowledge of what's going on and where everything is inside the building. Secondary to that, it'd be great to have, for emergency purposes, if you have officers that are in plain clothes or they're in business attire, to have a vest, like a traffic vest that says security, something that they could put on if the police are going to respond to the location, that will quickly identify themselves to those on-duty officers that are responding. And remember, one of the advantages of hiring retired or off-duty law enforcement officers are trained in confrontation situations with on-duty police. They're trained on what to do and how to handle the situation, how to identify themselves to make sure that no one is injured by that so-called quote friendly fire, and that everybody knows who each other is in that situation that could be very, very tense.
Could I just add something, Seth? We talked about calling 911 in case of an emergency and how everyone should be empowered, know that they're empowered to make that call. If you're part of the security team or you know about the security team and you're calling 911, it would be important to mention if there are armed security members on site. That's the kind of information that you should be giving first responders before they arrive. And then just a quick note about some products that are available. In addition to the traffic vest, there are also high visibility hats and sashes that fold up small enough that security officers could keep them on their person at all times. Thank you.
Thanks, Ethan. One more question, Mitch?
One more, yeah.
So this is an important question, and I think it'd be a good question to end on. Can you define shelter in place?
David, you want to take it?
Okay, there's two basic protective measures. One is evacuation, when the danger is inside and you want to bring people away from the danger outside. Example, fire. Sheltering in place, and there are multiple iterations of sheltering in place, is the danger is outside. You want to keep the danger outside and protect your people by bringing them inside. Now, what can be the danger? It could be chemical. Ethan is our resident WMD specialist. It could be, we have in the Philadelphia area a prisoner who broke out. So you want to lock the outside doors, or it could be an active threat. So you want to lock people inside, inside several layers of protection. So what you want at shelter in place can be different. People should know that they should have an emergency plan that includes calling an audible. In other words, the person in charge of the emergency has the best information available and tells them tells people what to do next. But that's part of your emergency plan.
I will just jump in on that. In the end of the day, you need there's many terminology and everybody can call it different. Shelter in place zone, safe rooms. You need, the name of the game is buying time. In an active shooter scenario, we have to buy time until the police will come. And your first barrier, and we talk about layered security, is the deterrent of the security personnel. Then the door. Then if you create another room inside of your facility, your sanctuary, that can be locked, and you know how to lock it, and if it cannot be locked, what can you use to block it in case of emergency so people can barricade inside? And once again, you create another layer inside your facility, another shelter-in-place area that you buy time. Now this attacker tried to come in, he has to pass through the security, through the door, and another set of doors to come into.
Layers are important. You know, just the example of Memphis. If that gate was locked, Joel may not have ever entered the campus. So, you know, fortunately, there was a second layer, the outer doors that were locked. So that helped. But the more layers you have, and the more the better you can implement your layers, the better your shelter in place will be.
Great. Thank you, David and Liron. So, you know, CSI is a joint initiative of the JCRC of New York, and we heard from Noam at the top of the hour. And now we're going to close with UJA Federation, who is also a key supporter of CSI. So let me turn to Andrea Fleischacker, the planning director at UJA for Jewish Life.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to the entire CSI team for speaking with us today. As someone who's going to be spending the holidays sitting in shul and synagogue in between my 93-year-old grandfather and my 3-year-old child, I feel deeply, deeply comforted knowing that the CSI team is available to my community and to the entire New York community to really make sure that we have a safe places to gather. So really, to Mitch, to Seth, to Ira, to Terry, to Liron for an incredible session this afternoon, and really to the whole team. And on behalf of UJA, just want to wish everybody a happy, healthy, and safe New Year. So Shana Tova, Happy New Year, everybody.
Shana Tova.